If you happen to have a couple of thousand loose, by gosh, it's a chance in a million." "Yes," said Denry, "I should say that's just about what it was." "I put it before you," Cotterill proceeded, gathering way, and missing the flavour of Denry's remark, "because you're a friend of the family. You're so often here. Why, it's pretty near 10 years." Denry sighed. "I expect I come and see you all about once a fortnight, fairly regular. That makes 250 times in 10 years. Yes, a couple of said Cotterill reflectively. 250 into 2000. 8. £8 a visit. A shade thick, Cotterill, a shade thick. You might be half a dozen fashionable physicians rolled into one." Never before had he called the Councillor Cotterill, unadorned. Mr. Cotterill flushed and rose. Denry does not appear to advantage in this interview. He failed in magnanimity. The only excuse that can be offered for him is that Mr. Cotterill had called him "young man" once or twice too often in the course of 10 years. It's subtle. 3 "No," whispered Ruth in all her wraps. "Don't bring it up to the door. I'll walk down with you to the gate and get in there." He nodded. They were off together. Ruth, it had appeared, was actually staying at the Five Towns Hotel in Knype, which at that epoch was the only hotel in the Five Towns seriously pretending to be first class in the full page advertisement sense. The fact that Ruth was staying at the Five Towns Hotel impressed Denry anew. Assuredly she did things in the grand manner. She had meant to walk down by the Park to Bursley Station and catch the last Loop Lane train to Knype, and when Denry suddenly disclosed the existence of his motor car and proposed to see her to her hotel in it, she in her turn had been impressed. The astonishment in her tone as she exclaimed, "Have you got a motor?" was the least in the world naïve. Thus they departed together from the stricken house, Ruth saying brightly to Nellie, who had reappeared in a painful state of demoralisation, that she should return on the morrow. And Denry went down the obscure drive with a final vision of the poor child Nellie as she stood at the door to speed them. It was extraordinary how that child had remained a child. He knew that she must be more than half way through her twenties, yet she persisted in being the merest girl. A delightful little thing, but no savoir faire, no equality to a situation, no spectacular pride. Just a nice, bright, strangely girlish... The Cotterills had managed that bad evening badly. They had shown no dignity, no reserve, no discretion, and old Cotterill had been simply fatuous in his suggestion. As for Mrs. Cotterill, she was completely overcome, and it was due solely to Ruth's calm, managing influence that Nellie, nervous and whimpering, had wound herself up to come and shut the front door after the guests. It was all very sad. When he had successfully started the car, and they were sliding down the Moorhouse Hill together, side by side, their shoulders touching, Denry threw off the nightmarish effect of the bankrupt household. After all, there was no reason why he should be depressed. He was not a bankrupt. He was steadily adding riches to riches. He acquired wealth mechanically now. Owing to the habits of his mother, he never came within miles of living up to his income. And Ruth, she too was wealthy. He felt that she must be wealthy in the strict significance of the term. And she completed wealth by experience of the world. She was his equal. She understood things in general. She had lived, travelled, suffered, reflected. In short, she was a complete article of manufacture. She was no little clinging raw girl. Further, she was less hard than of yore. Her voice and gestures had a different quality. The world had softened her. And it occurred to him suddenly that her sole fault, extravagance, had no importance now that she was wealthy. He told her all that Mr. Cotterill had said about Canada, and she told him all that Mrs. Cotterill had said about Canada, and they agreed that Mr. Cotterill had got his deserts, and that in its own interest Canada was the only thing for the Cotterill family, and the sooner the better. People must accept the consequences of bankruptcy. Nothing could be done. "I think it's a pity Nellie should have to go," said Denry. "Oh, do you?" replied Ruth. "Yes. Going out to a strange country like that. She's not what you might call the Canadian kind of a girl. If she could only get something to do here. If something could be found for her." "Oh, I don't agree with you at all," said Ruth. "Do you really think she ought to leave her parents just now? Her place is with her parents. And besides, between you and me, she'll have a much better chance of marrying there than in this town, after all this. Of course I should be very sorry to lose her, and Mrs Cotterill too, but—" "I expect you're right," Denry concurred, and they sped on luxuriously through the lamplit night of the Five Towns, and Denry pointed out his house as they passed it, and they both thought much of the security of their positions in the world, and of their incomes, and of the honeyed deference of their bankers, and also of the mistake of being a failure. You could do nothing with a failure. 4. On a frosty morning in early winter you might have seen them together in a different vehicle, a first-class compartment of the express from Knype to Liverpool. They had the compartment to themselves, and they were installed therein with every circumstance of luxury. Both were enwrapped in furs, and a fur rug united their knees in its shelter. Magazines and newspapers were scattered about to the value of a labourer's hire for a whole day. And when Denry's eye met the guard's, it said "shilling." In short, nobody could possibly be more superb than they were on that morning in that compartment. The journey was the result of peculiar events. Mr Cotterill had made himself a bankrupt, and cast away the robe of a town councillor. He had submitted to the inquisitiveness of the official receiver, and to the harsh prying of those rampant baying beasts, his creditors. He had laid bare his books, his correspondence, his lack of method, his domestic extravagance, and the distressing fact that he had continued to trade long after he knew himself to be insolvent. He had, for several months, in the interests of the said beasts, carried on his own business as a manager at a nominal salary, and gradually everything that was his had been sold, and during the final weeks the Cotterill family had been obliged to quit their dismantled house and exist in lodgings. It had been arranged that they should go to Canada by way of Liverpool, and on the day before the journey of Denry and Ruth to Liverpool they had departed from the borough of Bursley, which Mr Cotterill had so extensively faced with terra cotta, unhonoured and unsung. Even Denry, though he had visited them in their lodgings to say good bye, had not seen them off at the station. But Ruth Capron Smith had seen them off at the station. She had interrupted a sojourn in Southport in order to come to Bursley, and dispatched them therefrom with due friendliness. Certain matters had to be attended to after their departure, and Ruth had promised to attend to them. Now, immediately after seeing them off, Ruth had met Denry in the street. "Do you know," she said brusquely, "those people are actually going steerage? I'd no idea of it. Mr and Mrs Cotterill kept it from me, and I shouldn't have heard of it, only from something Nellie said. That's why they've gone to day. The boat doesn't sail till to morrow afternoon." "Steerage?" and Denry whistled. "Yes," said Ruth. "Nothing but pride, of course. Old Cotterill wants to have every penny he can scrape, so as to be able to make the least tiny bit of a show when he gets to Toronto. And so steerage. Just think of Mrs Cotterill and Nellie in the steerage! If I'd known of it I should have altered that, I can tell you, and pretty quickly too. Now it's too late." "No, it isn't," Denry contradicted her flatly. "But they've gone." "I could telegraph to Liverpool for saloon berths. There's bound to be plenty at this time of year. And I could run over to Liverpool to morrow and catch 'em on the boat and make 'em change." She asked whether he really thought he could, and he assured her. "Second class cabins would be better," said she. "Why?" "Well, because of dressing for dinner and so on. They haven't got the clothes, you know." "Of course," said Denry. "Listen," she said, with an enchanting smile. "Let's halve the cost, you and I, and let's go to Liverpool together and make the little gift and arrange things. I'm leaving for Southport to morrow, and Liverpool's on my way."